If you ever meet an animator who tells you, meh, I don't really use the graph editor, it's not really that important, it's not necessary, I just work in the viewport, it's fine. Don't be friends with that person. Run away from them. Because you could also say, you know, I like to drive, but I don't really use the brake pedal. You could drive with just the gas, but it's not going to go very well for anybody involved. We're going to pretend it's the exact same thing here, because the graph editor is one of the most essential and useful tools in an animator's arsenal, and most people aren't using it correctly. They either don't know how to set it up right, or they don't know how to really use it all that well. And this video is not clickbait. I'm going to show you 7 specific things that are going to completely change the way you use the graph editor. Whether you're brand new to it, this is going to set you up for success. And if you've been using it for years, I'm still probably going to show you some stuff you haven't seen before. And last thing before we jump into it, this video is sponsored by Autodesk, which is super cool. And a lot of the things I'm going to show in this video are kind of reasons why we use Maya over any other tool, because the graph editor, the one in Maya, actually has a lot of features that other tools don't yet have. But 2 things I want to remind everybody of. Number 1, Maya is free to all students, and it's not some limited educational license. A lot of people seem to think it might be. It's not. It's full Maya. It's the educational license, which has a little pop-up telling people it's education license, but that's it. It does everything you'd expect it to do. And if, like me, you eventually get out of the education bubble and you no longer have access to it for free, don't pay for the commercial version of Maya. They have Maya Indie. Maya Indie is like $290 a year. I've had it for a couple of years. It's the same price as Houdini. It's less expensive than Cinema 4D, which has its whole bundle. But a lot of people don't seem to realize that you don't have to pay for commercial Maya. You can just get Maya Indie. And if you want to, I'll put a link in the description. It'll actually be a magic link, so it's like an affiliate link. So if you end up signing up for a Maya license, you'll actually earn a commission off that. So thank you for that. But anyways, enough talk. Let's jump into the graph editor. I'll go into my graph editor, found here for anybody who's new, and this is what it looks like by default. Now, if this is the first time you're ever really seeing someone work in the graph editor, I have a video that actually explains the beginner stuff. So I'm going to just skip all of that and jump right to the tips. Now, I don't know why this isn't a default, but they fixed this in 2020. If you select a curve, any curve, zoom in, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit S to set a key. See how it messed up the curve shape? Right? Hitting S changes the spline. Now, some people say, oh, but you can just right click and insert a key, or some people will hold I for the insert tool, and then you can click and you can insert keys that way. That's true. You can totally do that. But if you're just grabbing a curve and hitting S, it shouldn't do this. They fixed this around 2020. If you go up to the animation menu set, you go to the key menu and go to set key. That's the thing that's happening when you hit S. Go to the option box and enable set key preserves curve shape. And then to save it, just either hit set key or apply. If I just go over here and hit S, it doesn't break the curve anymore. I don't know why that's not the default behavior, but there it is. I'm gonna hope that a lot of you know this one, but most people don't. So let's talk about it. This is not the only way to look at your curves in the graph editor, and it's usually not the best way either. Because what often happens is that when you have all this stuff in the graph editor, you may have one control. Maybe this character is running through space and he eventually gets all the way over here. What ends up happening in the graph editor is that you have one control that goes really, really, really big on this graph, and everything else you have to sit here zooming in, and then you can't see it, and you're like, okay, cool, I'm gonna go ahead and hit A or F or something to re-expand it, and then it condenses all your main data down here. And that's because we're in something called the absolute view, which means that we have a set scale of numerical values, right? The whole graph being at 0 here, and then everything else goes wherever, and everything's mapped to it. But if you go to view, you can actually see absolute, stacked, and normalized view, or 1, 2, and 3 in the graph editor. Absolute view is a normal graph. Everything is plotted where it would be based on its value over time. If you hit the 2 or go to stacked view, suddenly it gets rid of that numerical scale. We no longer have a standard 0 for everything and then 100 for everything. They're all just stacked on top of each other, and the numbers don't matter anymore, which makes it really nice to be able to see, so when this hits here, that's what this one's doing. And you can now retime stuff a lot easier, seeing what curves are all doing together. Last thing is, if you don't want them all stacked on top of each other, but you do like having them kind of normalized, that's what relative view is for, or 3 on the keyboard. Normalized view will have everything go from the top to the bottom. They'll all share the same space, regardless of what normal values they actually take up. It makes it much easier to work with your curves when you can just customize how you're viewing them in the graph editor. Most 3D software defaults to absolute view as well, and some tools have a normalized view or a relative view, whatever they call it, but I have not seen any other 3D tool that has a stacked view, which to me is an essential tool. One of the main reasons I love working in Maya, especially when it comes to doing cycles. This is really helpful. We'll talk about that another time though. Next up is weighted tangents. I'm going to show you a quick little demo of something that a Pixar animator once showed me, and it totally blew my mind and changed the way I work to this day. Weighted tangents are not the default in Maya, but I encourage everybody watching to try them out if you haven't before. Non-weighted tangents are these little diamond icons that normally just let you move them back and forth. And you can go to any curve and change which type of tangent it is on a curve-by-curve basis, but my recommendation is to just go to your animation preferences, go to the animation tab, and change it here so that it's just the way you want it for everything. If I switch this to weighted tangents and hit save, any objects that are already existing in the scene don't have that applied to them yet, so I'll just go ahead and grab these now and switch them. But anything in the future will now just default to the little square handles. This allows me to both rotate it like normal, but also to expand the weight or influence of this key over its interpolation to adjacent keyframes. I'll do a quick bouncing ball and just show you why weighted tangents are so powerful. If I leave this as a non-weighted tangent thing, I'll show you what we've all done before. You take your little handles, and we've all done this, where we take this and we break it, and you can right click and break it that way. And then you point these. And when I was a student, used to spend so much time. I'd zoom in and I'd make sure I was pixel perfect to make sure this is exactly lined up with the thing. Which is funny because that's wrong for several reasons. But anyways, but what that gives us is a very mechanical ball bounce that has a very sharp arc, no hang time. So if we say, oh, well, we want to add hang time, we want this to, bounce up a little bit quicker. I'll take this, I'll just set that to auto, come over here, set a key, move it up. But then I gotta come back in here, I gotta readjust these things again, which again, these are not actually gonna be accurate to what they need to be, but I'm just doing what we've all done. This process should not be shocking to anybody. But there we go, there's our bouncing ball. But then you get the note that says, hey, can you make that ball bounce lower or higher or whatever? Take all these, I'll move them down. It's like, oop, if it's bouncing lower, I've got to fix all of this, right? I'm not going to, you get the point. I'll go really high, same thing. I'm gonna need to point these and reorient them. Non-weighted tangents are not particularly good at these kinds of things because you have to not only continue to maintain the direction that these are pointing, but you also have to add a lot of keys to do things like hang time. Now with this curve back to default and set to weighted tangents, I'll show you how it's better. If I take this and instead of trying to point it, I'll just hold shift so it doesn't start rotating. I'll just hold shift and go whoop, whoop, and just get rid of those. And then this one also, whoop, condense it to nothing. And sometimes you'll notice that if you have a tangent that's uneven, maybe it's longer on one side than the other, you can't actually condense it past the shorter side. And so in this case, I might break it just to shrink it down. What I've done here is I've negated the weight of these keys, meaning that those points in time, those keyframes, have no influence over the interpolation of the curves in and out of them. So now all I have to do is extend the weight or the influence of the top key to create that hang time. There's more weight on the top, and so the top has more control and weight over the rest of the curve. Does that make sense? So now I've created a bouncing ball in a fraction of the time and with way more control, because now if I say, oh, you know what, this needs to go much higher, I don't have to adjust jack. I need to go way lower, doesn't matter. Because these have no say over the curve, these things have all the weight. It doesn't matter what the values are. The ratio of what's important is the same regardless. And so the trick is that with weighted tangents, you change the weight. You never, ever need to change the direction. You might just get rid of one side if that's important and you need to have that happen, but you never need to start pointing them in different directions. So this is a faster workflow, a cleaner workflow because less keys, and a more procedural workflow in terms of the interpolation. Overall, would recommend, if you haven't tried this before, give it a shot, try it for a week, see what you think. The next tip is a little bit more basic, but no less important. I made a car analogy earlier in the video, but Maya is like a car in that you don't just get in and drive. You adjust your seat, you adjust the height of things, you mess with your mirrors. Maya is a very complex tool. It can do a lot of things, and it's not usually ready for most people to just start working right out the gate. I mean, it is, but you want to get comfortable. You want to make sure that it's actually efficient for you personally in your workflow to use. Now there's a ton of stuff we could talk about in terms of settings and adjustments and things that I recommend changing, but just to point it out, Maya has a really strong hotkey editor. I think it's got one of the best hotkey editors I've ever seen in any tool, 3D software or not, because when you open it, you can see what's mapped on what keys, and if you hold Control and Shift and Alt or just whatever, you can see what's in use, which I really like. You can also set your presets and things like that. You can put custom scripts in here and link that to key presses. I'm not going to do a whole tutorial on this one topic right now, but what I wanted to point out is that things like breaking your tangent handles or setting something to auto tangent or buffer curves or whatever, you can set all of that as hotkeys, and then you can put all of that into a Stream Deck or something on your desk that does hotkeys, I have a whole video coming out where I'm doing a desk tour setup for what I'm currently using. In case you're interested in that, make sure you're subscribed, and while you're at it, hit the like button if you're enjoying this video. If it's helping you out so far, hit the thumbs up, makes a big difference, and subscribe if you haven't already. It's free, you can always change your mind. Thank you. The next three all go hand in hand. They are the big visual changes to the graph editor that make it so much more useful. Now, I used to use the graph editor like this. I'd have this panel here and all my stuff, and whatever view I'm looking through, this is what I normally would be looking at. But we've all been here where we're looking for a specific curve or specific thing or attribute, and it's kind of lost, right? Now, cool thing is if you go to stacked view, they're all actually in order. So this translate X is going to be the top thing. So if I go to translate X, boop, you can see here it's selected. This one underneath is rotate Z. That's just because the other ones don't have values on them. So this is going to be the translate X and so on. But this window on the left is pretty useful in terms of knowing what's what. If I select this, I can see what it is. I can also filter by this, right? So I used to do this all the time where I'd say, oh, I just want to see that one. But then how many times have you done this where you go here and you grab all your translates and you're scrolling, and you're just filtering, and I'm going to go ahead and stop doing this, but you get the point. You grab all the things and it filters them all, right? We've all done that, especially with even just the pendulum assignment. And then you make a change and you perpetuate that change across a bunch of different curves, and maybe you offset a bunch of stuff and you're like, yeah, this is great. And you realize, oh shoot, I forgot one. I have to undo and do all that over again, and because it only grabs the translate X's that you clicked on. Let me just rock your world real quick. What I'm going to do is you can go to the channels and you can do it with these two here, but what I'm actually going to do is go into my animation preferences, or the man running from the gear of death. And in this time slider category, you're going to see the same options here under channel box sync. What I'd like you to do is select both of these, deselect them both, then reselect them both, and hit save. If you are doing it from here, you're going to need to select them, unselect them, and then reselect them. There's a little bit of a bug. It's been there for a couple of years and it seems to still be there, where you might turn them both on and it may not work. So turn them both off, then turn them back on again, because it actually makes them work. But now check this out. If I'm like, oh cool, I want all the translate X's, just click on the word translate X on the side here, boop, and it does it for all of them. I freaked out when I found that out, because there you go. That's all of your translate X's. They're all selected, every single one. You don't have to worry about it. You can go translate Y, you can grab them by multiples, and it's just going to grab every single one for everything you have selected. The other thing that's cool about that is if you select, say, the head in this case, you can see that I have a bunch of keys on rotate Z, but I don't have keys on everything else. If I click rotate Z, you'll see my timeline shows all the stuff, but I go to rotate X, my timeline is devoid of keys now because there are no keys to show. So it actually syncs your channel box, your graph editor, and your timeline in terms of where you see keys and what keys you see. So that's these little options, but we're going to keep going, because one thing I want to get you comfortable with the idea of is getting rid of this sidebar. I used to love this sidebar. Like I said, I used to use it for all kinds of stuff. Now I collapse it. I don't work with it anymore. But in order to do that, we have to fix a few more things, because what this is good for is, first of all, filtering by different channels. Check, we got that. But the next thing is, if you have a bunch of stuff on screen here, and you're like, but which one is this? I see this is a green one. It's gonna be something involving Y. Let me select it, and then you scroll through and you're like, here it is. Here's the little green square. That's for this control, the upper arm FK, right? But what if I didn't need to be scrolling through looking for a square? Just go to View, Curve Name, and go Active Only. What that will do is anytime I select a curve, it will tell me the name of that curve in the graph editor. So if I say, what's this one? The head control, rotate Z. That is so much easier, faster, and more efficient than me sitting here trying to scroll and say, here you are, rotate Z. And then I gotta reframe it, right? You could set it to always, but I would not recommend it. It's just gonna give a ton of visual noise. So curve name, active only, go ahead and turn that on, and if you select multiple things, it'll tell you what they are. With those settings turned on, you can now collapse this without worrying about missing anything. That saves you a lot of screen space, especially if you're working on a laptop. But there's one more thing, and this is one of the best things that I ever did in the graph editor. It was recommended to me by Daniel Klug, who at the time used to work at Disney. This is a change that I found some people are a little nervous to do, but don't be. And that's the thing, you can reset everything I've showed you in this video very easily. So try all of these things and see if you miss what you had before. Now the main problem we're about to solve is that if you select a bunch of controls and you look at the graph editor, it's a whole lot of red, blue, and green. And if you have other controls like the foot that has a bunch of these like leg twists, foot rolls, most of those are gray. Your standard attributes are all these same 3 colors, and so you never know if a translate or a rotate X is going to look a certain way because they all just look red. Let's change that. If you go to Edit, Set Curve Colors, well, actually, I'm going to leave this footage in. I've done this a few times when I'm like, oh, I think there's a button for it, and I try to show it to people, and I click that, and every single time I go, oh, that's not what I wanted to happen. I've just made everything pink, and it's actually kind of hard to get it to not be pink anymore. So don't do what I just did. I'm going to leave this in here so that I can tell you don't do this. How I actually set this up is to go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Color Settings. This is where you can go to 3D views, and that's actually how I change my background. But if you go down to Graph Editor, this is where you can change your colors for your graph editor. So translate X, Y, and Z, I leave the way they were. I just add a little bit of saturation. I like them to be really bright and vibrant. Rotate, I just change the hues a little bit. So instead of red, I go orange for X. Y just becomes yellow instead of green, and then rotate Z, I make it cyan instead of the darker blue. And then for scale, I either just kind of do this scale of like bright to muted pink, or I might go like pink, blurple, and like violet. But then if you go to a really dark violet like I've done before, like I used to do it like this, it gets really hard to see in the graph editor. So I stopped doing that. I now do it this way. I don't use scale as often, so they're not as important to me. And I do this because now when I select my curves and I jump to any normal view, it is a big mess of spaghetti, but now it's a lot easier to decipher because instead of 3 colors for everything, I now know that if I'm looking for a rotate X, this could be it. This could also be it. This is a rotate X, this is a rotate X. It's a little bit more information that Maya is giving me right out the gate, and I can select them all, see the names, and easily filter through what I'm looking for. If I know I'm looking for a rotate Y, it's going to be yellow. And it takes about a week to get used to that, but once you have, this is no longer necessary. You get everything you need, easily filterable and searchable by clicking a thing, seeing its name. And just like that, the graph editor has become so much more powerful and so much more useful as it helps you instead of hinders you to do the work you're trying to do. So whether it's setting keys and not having it mess up your splines, if you're adjusting the way you view things, you're messing with tangent weights, you're putting shortcuts, you're doing the selection, sync, names, colors, these are all things that once you have them set, you can pretty much just leave them that way and work a lot more efficiently. But please let me know in the comments if anything in here was brand new to you, if there's anything in here that's totally changed your view of the graph editor or the way you're gonna work, things like that. I'm super curious to hear your thoughts. And once again, a big thank you to Autodesk for sponsoring this video. If you wanna check out Maya Indie, I'll put a link down below. And if you're a student, don't bother buying it, just get it for free, because you can, so why not? Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm Sir Wade, and I'll see you in the next video.